Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we are taking a look at the best decks in all three pools for the new hot location. So these hot locations happen once a week for 24 hours. They pick a location, and it will be showing up at a 60% rate in every game until it ends during the next daily reset. This hot location is cloning Vats, which involves when you play a card, you get a copy of it added to your hand. So pretty powerful location here. And we're going to take a look at some decks in pools 1, 2, and 3 that should be pretty effective to make use of this location. We're going to start off with our pool 1 decks here. First up is Devil Dino. Now, unsurprisingly, if you've played Snap at all for a little bit, you've probably seen quite a lot of this guy, and he is one of the more powerful cards in both Pool 1 and Pool 2, and for good reason. Now, normally, you might notice in our list here, we don't have Moon Girl. Moon Girl combos with Devil Dinosaur, duplicates your hand, so it makes the Dino bigger. You can get a second copy of Dino. It's normally a very good strategy. However, obviously, with the new location, it's very easy to get a copy of Devil Dino. So I think that Moon Girl is kind of redundant right now, and you don't really need her, at least as long as this hot location is ongoing. So basically, very simple, straightforward Pool 1 deck here. We just have some very solid 1-drops in Ant-Man, Nightcrawler, and Nova. The whole thing with this is you really don't want to dump your hand, obviously, because of the dinosaur. You will get a lot smaller if you do. Then we have a lot of effects that are good at generating cards in hand, such as Cable, Sentinel, and White Queen. Then on top of that, we just have some generally good cards to help round it out here. Carnage Nova is a nice little combo to basically just make your whole team a bit stronger, and it's very good with the location, as you can play multiple Novas and then get a Carnage, and when you actually copy the Carnage, the copy will have the power of the Carnage that you just played after the on reveal effect, so you can actually make a bigger Carnage in another lane, which is pretty cool. Then we just have decent other cards to kind of fill in the curve here. Mr. Fantastic, just a solid 3-drop. Jessica Jones, another solid 4-drop. And Iron Man to basically just double our power in a lane. We're also running Chavez, but the main reason we're running Chavez in this deck is not actually to use as a 6-drop all the time, but for the other added effective, she makes us more consistently draw all the other cards in our deck, which is good because we really don't want to see a 6-cost card early on in the game. So that's our first Pool 1 deck here. And then our next Pool 1 deck here is a Khazar Zoo deck. So pretty unsurprising if you've been looking into some of the different decks in the different pools. I think by far the two best decks early on in the game are Khazar Zoo as well as Devil Dino. But this one has a few cards that are different than normal that we use to try and take advantage of the hot location. Now, probably the most notable inclusion here that you don't normally see in other decks is Forge. So on reveal gives the next card you play +2 power. This is very powerful with the new, or not the new, but the hot location, because not only are you giving the next card you play +2 power, and if you play this in the location, you get a copy to do it again. When you play that card and it gets the +2 power, the new card that you get a copy of will actually have that +2 power stapled on it. Much like I mentioned with Carnage before, how the copy actually gets his total power after the on-reveal effect. So that's pretty strong. It's pretty nice because that means you can get a lot of value out of Forge here. Other than that, we just have a whole lot of 1-drops because obviously the deck is centered around basically ongoing buff effects through both Khazar and Blue Marvel. Chavez is also here, again, performing kind of the same role as before. She can be a powerful late game drop, but a big reason we're running her is because we want to consistently get our 1-drops going as early as possible in the game. Other than that, we just have a lot of good 1-drops here. One that I think is very notable with this location is also Korg, because you can actually just keep spamming him in the location and make it more and more likely that your opponent is going to draw a useless rock every turn, which is actually pretty powerful. Other than that, pretty standard stuff here. Got our little Nova Carnage package, like usual. Very good with a deck that is going wide. Squirrel Girl just gives us more tokens basically that get buffed up by our ongoing effects and can be fodder to grow our Carnage as well. And then Ant-Man, also good with the location. He gets very big when you fill up the location, and you could actually have a whole location full of Ant-Man, which is kind of cool. And then just Elektra, because she is some of the best early game removal we have at this point in Pool 1. So those are our two main Pool 1 decks. I think they should both be very effective at making the most out of this hot location. Let's check out some Pool 2 decks. First up, we have our Pool 2 upgrades to Devil Dino. So the core of this deck stays very much the same, but there are some very good additions we do get in Pool 2 that are definitely worth your consideration. So basically, the cards we're really adding to this deck from Pool 2, Agent 13, just very good 1-drop that synergizes with our game plan. Sometimes the random card can be helpful, but if nothing else, she is replacing herself, keeping our Dino big, and useful with the hot location because you can keep adding cards to keep your hand big, which is nice. Then we also have the addition of the Collector. So the Collector, he benefits from what we're trying to do already, which is grow the amount of cards in our hand. And every time we're getting a card to our hand that didn't start from our deck, he gets 1 more power. So very powerful effect there. That synergizes with our other strong cards that add cards to hand, such as Cable, Sentinel, and White Queen. One change we did end up making to this deck is adding Bishop, because now that we have some more 1-drops that we really like and play a lot, like Agent 13, Bishop can actually grow pretty large, though I would say the 3-drop slot is kind of a flex slot, and you can afford to kind of try out a variety of things. A Cosmo could also be a good consideration here if you're running into a lot of on-reveal effects, but you got to be careful with that because obviously he shuts down on-reveal for both players in that lane. But other than that, the deck is pretty much the same core as before. Same reasons for a lot of the same cards here, just a slightly better version of it with these new Pool 2 cards. And speaking of slightly better versions of Pool 1 decks, we have the upgrades to the Khazar Zoo deck. This one's pretty interesting. So obviously anyone who's played in Pool 2 for a decent amount of time knows that Zoo decks usually have, a lot more to worry about in Pool 2, as Killmonger starts being very, very popular and he destroys a lot of your 1-drops. However, that does not mean Zoo's actually a bad deck, and there are 2 different reasons for this. One, starting to run armor as good tech to help prevent basically Killmonger or other such effects blowing you out is a very powerful strategy, and one I think a lot of people are sleeping on. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't fully realize is due to the way the initiative system works in this game, is you can actually kind of sandbag your hand a bit, so you don't go all in dumping all the 1-drops you have. You want to hold some of these 1-drops for the end of the game, like let's say Ant-Man or Nightcrawler. And basically the whole idea with that is if you play them a bit from behind, your opponent will reveal first, so if they reveal a Killmonger, it'll go off before they see your 1-drops. This one isn't as all in on 1-drops though because of the prevalence of Killmonger in Pool 1, but we do have some pretty good additions from Pool 2 here. One I really like actually is Ebony Maw, so this card's really neat, huge power for cost, but it has a pretty big downside of you cannot play this after turn 3, so this is a 1-drop you really do want to or need to play in the early turns of the game, but I think there's a lot of payoff for it. And if you're going to be playing this card, armor is definitely a must, because if you're playing something with such a big drawback, with such big potential gains when you play it, you really want to be able to protect it, and armor does a great job of that. Another 1-drop that kind of falls into this category is Sunspot. This is one of the best 1-drops in the game across all pools. Incredibly powerful card, also helps smooth out your curve if you don't have something to use all your energy on in a given turn. But again, vulnerable to Killmonger, and so you definitely want to try and pair him up with your armor lane. Another 1-drop that I think is really good with this hot location is Iceman. Iceman, really, really powerful card here, and it's often deceptively powerful because you don't always see how good it is. But if you've had Iceman played against you, you know just how annoying it can be when he hits the one card you're about to play next turn. to costing 1 more, and that can deny sometimes a whole turn, which is really, really strong in the early game. And with the location, you can be increasing the cost of your opponent's cards pretty much every turn, which is, or at least, until you fill up the location. So that is, I think, a very powerful consideration. Definitely a good card there from Pool 2. Then just some other different things we have here. Angela. Angela's amazing. One of the best 2-drops in the game, and goes very well with having a more low to the ground, curve out kind of deck, which is what Zoo is trying to do. Another card that I think is pretty good here is Oki. I'm probably saying that wrong. But basically, just we need some more things we can play on too, so we're not all in on the 1-drops. And this helps make all the cards in our deck pretty powerful if we can get it out in the early game. So definitely a nice card to play on curve. Other than that, not too much to say about this, just the generally good cards here like Khazar and Blue Marvel to help basically boost our whole team up. I ended up going with Bishop because I think Bishop's a pretty good card here, but you could also consider Chavez for the reasons we mentioned before of making your draws a bit more consistent in the early game, which is important for decks like this. And our last Pool 2 deck here is going to be a deck focused around Carnage. Carnage is one of my favorite cards in the game, and I think he benefits very greatly from this location. As I mentioned before, when you get a copy of Carnage from the location, the copy's base power will actually be the total power he got after the on-reveal effect. So this enables you to stack up that location with a bunch of 1 or 2 cost cheap things that get value, and then eat them with Carnage, get a big Carnage, and get another copy to your hand. Another card that is definitely good to combo with this is Bucky Barnes. Very powerful card that we get in Pool 2. So Bucky and Carnage go together super duper well. You're basically always using your Carnage to enable Bucky, and he's just good versus some of the destroy locations, which is pretty nice. But yeah, you can stack up multiple Buckies or Bucky and Nova, and then get a big Carnage, and then you could do it again in another lane. Just that's kind of the core of what this deck is going for. It is kind of low to the ground. We have cards we get value off of, and then we're okay with sacrificing. So Iceman, for the reasons I said before, very powerful. Korg, another one, just filling your opponent's deck with rocks. There's just a lot of stuff that we have that we can kind of throw in the cloning lane, blow it up to Carnage, and then do it all over again. Armor making a appearance in this deck might seem kind of strange. Hey, why do you have armor in a deck where you care about destroying things? You just want to be very careful when you play your armor. You're not necessarily just going to be slamming this armor on turn 2, or if you are, you want to be sure you're doing that in a lane that you do not plan to blow stuff up in later on. But the reason this is good is because another card that we're running and that you probably will start to see more of in Pool 2 when he becomes available is Shang-Chi. This is a very powerful and popular card to help deal with some of the bigger things, much like the Devil Dinosaur. So you start seeing more of this, and since it becomes easier to make a very big Carnage, we want a way to protect our Carnage as well as our other big power minions, such as Wolfsbane, which is another good card with the location. As the location's easy to fill up, you can make her big, then do the same thing in another lane. And America Chavez. So armor really quite good. Obviously, we do have Killmonger here too, and even though that might seem a bit, anti-synergistic, I think due to how prevalent 1-drops are in Pool 1, he's still worth a slot, even though we have a lot of 1-drops in our deck. You just want to be careful about when you play him, and you want to try and line it up so you're actually eating a lot of your own 1-drops, like Iceman and Korg and Nova, before you end up playing Killmonger to destroy the opponent's 1-drops. So those are all our Pool 2 decks. Let's take a look at some Pool 3 ones. So for Pool 3, by far, I think the best deck for this location is going to be either a Death Wave or a Death Pool type of deck. Pretty powerful deck overall, but definitely can leverage the location to its advantage quite a bit. Basically, we have a very similar plan here as we had with the Carnage deck I just showed, where we have a lot of units that are good at being destroyed, such as Nova, Bucky Barnes, and our Mysterio copies. as well as Yondu, who gets value, and then we don't mind seeing him go. Also, a cool interaction with Yondu you might not be aware of is when he removes the top card of your opponent's deck, that actually contributes to lowering the cost of death. Now, the reason the deck is called Death Wave is because death actually synergizes very well with Wave, as Wave makes all cards in both players' hands cost 4, and death then goes to 4 cost, and her cost reduction is then applied. So if you have her costing 4 less, so normally she would be 5 cost, and you play Wave, you can play a normal card in your hand and then play death for free, which is a very, very powerful combo. And you don't even need death to be totally free. Even if you get her down to 1 or 2 cost after the reduction from 4, it still enables you to play more than 1 card that turn, when most other decks are only going to be able to play 1 card. So that is a very, very powerful asymmetrical effect. Then we have Taskmaster here, who combos very well with death, because since we can get death down essentially for free a decent amount of the time, we can get her down and then play Taskmaster afterwards, or even the following turn after we, or not even the following, even the same turn as we play her, especially with the Wave combo. So we actually end up getting 2 12 power things for very little cost, which is very, very strong. Chavez, again, pulling kind of a similar role as she has in other decks, where we're really running her so we have better odds of getting our destroy effects, as this deck is very centered around the fact that we need things to be destroyed to reduce the cost of death. So on top of that, we do have other destroy cards to reduce death, and death does get reduced for all cards destroyed this game. So if your opponent destroys cards or you destroy some of their cards, that reduces the cost as well. For that reason, we are running Killmonger, who is still very powerful in Pool 3, even though he isn't as kind of a hard counter as he is to some decks in Pool 2. And Deathlock, just to give us some more consistent destruction, as again, we really do need to get the destroy effects going to make death work how we want her to. Shang-Chi is kind of your tech slot. I like this card because you see a lot more targets for him in Pool 3, but there are definitely other things you could consider in this spot, like Enchantress or even Cosmo, but overall, I've quite liked Shang-Chi in this spot. There is another version of the list here, and you may have heard of this one before. This one is called Death Pool. I think this is probably the best version of the deck in the game. However, it requires notably more Pool 3 cards, some of which I do not have access to, so it's not one I've gotten to play much with myself. But this one kind of uses Deadpool, who we end up destroying multiple times. Those destruction effects trigger our death, get us more Deadpool to destroy again, and you can combo it very well with some of the other additions like Hulkbuster and Venom, who give us more destroy effects and ways of growing our Deadpool before Deadpool gets destroyed and then goes back to your hand with double the power. So very strong effect there. Another card here that we didn't see before is the Hood. The Hood is really, really strong. I would probably run him in my own Death Pool, or Death Wave, rather, deck that I just showcased, but unfortunately I don't have him yet, but he gives you a 1 cost 6 power thing, for the downside of being a 1 cost -2 power unit, but he's very easy to basically be fodder to our Carnage, Deathlock, or other destroy effects. So I think this is probably the strongest version of the deck, and I think it is probably the overall strongest deck that you can use to take advantage of this hot location in Pool 3. And the last Pool 3 deck we'll be taking a look at here is the Pool 3 upgrade of the Devil Dino deck. So much like in the jump from Pool 1 to Pool 2, there are some very good additions that Pool 3 has to offer to make your Dino deck a bit stronger. So overall, core of the deck stays very similar. A lot of cards are still doing what they did before. However, we have 2 main new additions that we get access to. The first is Quinjet. This card is very, very powerful, and it synergizes very well with the hot location because you can get another copy of it and then reduce the cost of the cards that didn't start in your hand by an additional 1. You start being able to play some very decent, powerful cards, such like Sentinel, for free, which is great, and then you can continue to get more copies of them, and grow your hand, keep the hand big, so that way you have a big dino to close out with. The other card that is a very powerful addition to this deck is Beast. So on reveal, return your other cards at this location to your hand. They cost 1 less. So this is a very, very strong effect, especially when you can actually synergize it with Quinjet, because if you're bouncing cards that didn't start in your deck, then they're getting reduced even further. And obviously with the hot location, we're getting more cards added to our hand that didn't start in our deck. So that is going to be even more cards that Quinjet can reduce. So this card is like super duper powerful with this hot location and really allows you to dump a lot of the cards in your hand while not necessarily emptying your hand, so that way you still have a very large dino to help close out the game. But yeah, the rest of the deck, pretty core stuff that we went over before. Not a whole lot has changed with it, but definitely a very solid Pool 3 consideration. Now, there are more Pool 3 decks that are good with this location, but I think the ones that I showcased are really the ones that take the highest advantage of it. Other ones can honestly be good with the location without even being modified, but I think if you want to take the most advantage of it, the decks that I've showcased here are probably the best way to do that. But yeah, those are all of our decks for pools 1 through 3 for the new hot location. This one's come around before, it'll probably come around again, and I think it's a pretty fun one. So best of luck. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.